morning to Jeff and Julie. I don't know if your girls are with you or not, but if they are, good morning to them as well. Glad you all are joining us. We're talking this morning about another bad guy. And I don't know if you how closely you've paid attention to this, but as we've studied each one of these bad guys as they're characterized, you probably have noticed that there are character or personality deficiencies in each of them. In other words, there's something amiss in their hearts that would create or cause them to behave in the way in which they do, which reminds us about how important it is for our hearts to be transformed by the Spirit. And so that's what makes them bad guys. So we're going to be talking about someone who's an opportunist this morning, Doeg the Edomite. And question 1 says, an opportunist is someone who takes advantages of circumstances without much regard for principles or the consequences to others. Give a few examples of an opportunist at work. See how well we're understanding this. What is an example of an opportunist at work?
I want to think of a con man who, tries to work his way into your life, pretending to care about you and only wants something from you, money or whatever.
Yeah. So, especially if it's, I'll just tell a story. I won't mention any names, but there was someone who was kind of behind in their retirement, and so but they were nearing retirement, and so somebody came along knowing that this person was kind of a little desperate, and said, "Hey, I've got an investment here that will more than catch you up," and they invested all their retirement and lost it completely because this person was an opportunist. They saw a vulnerable moment, and that's part of the key here. There's a vulnerable moment, and so an opportunist takes advantage of that vulnerable moment. Got another example?
Not necessarily one, but during the Depression, when people were desperate for homes and cars, there were people that had money that were willing to buy those things up at less than a tenth of the value or whatever. Just opportunists. They were investing for their future while other people were selling away everything they had.
If you watch it, this is fresh in my mind because we watched it this past week, but It's a Wonderful Life. Potter, I saved the town by giving them 50 cents on the dollar what everything was worth. Now that's how he saw it. That's being an opportunist.
At the same time, an opportunist isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's someone who has the courage to step into where they see a window, to fill a need. I would say that things like, for example, the Black Panthers, they found an opportunity when they first formed in California to fill the need of feeding school children and giving them breakfast before they went to school. Wasn't necessarily them trying to influence others. They saw an opportunity to serve their community, and so they stepped in as opportunists and filled that need. Of course, nowadays people hear Black Panther and run screaming from the ears, but that wasn't how it was started.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have, there's opportunities all around us. It's just whether or not you have the courage to reach out and touch somebody's life, to find the kid who is sitting by themselves and go in and say, "So what's new?" The wallflower. To step in and ask somebody out on a date. Not that wasn't me. I had to plan a trick, but.
Well, I want to differentiate someone who takes advantage of an opportunity to do good from an opportunist who is someone who exploits someone's vulnerability. I think about a situation where maybe a husband and wife are having their relationship is strained. Someone kind of has an interest in one or the other, and they kind of come in those vulnerable moments and kind of sabotage the relationship. Is someone who's an opportunist. So that's another. Doeg, we're going to see him in a similar light. So let's start in 1 Samuel 21, 1 through 9, and get the context of what's going on. Somebody read those verses, please.
David went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about the mission I am sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find." But the priest answered David, "I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women." David replied, "Indeed, women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out. The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today?" So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. David asked Ahimelech, "Don't you have a spear or sword here?" "I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent." The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me."
Okay, David was still on the run from Saul and in desperate need of food and protection. He turned to Ahimelech, the high priest. But David lied to Ahimelech. What were the lies and why did he lie? So what do you see? What are some of the lies?
The king sent him on a mission.
All right, the king said, what was the truth of the matter?
He was running pretty much.
He was running. Even Jonathan is now convinced that his father is out to kill his close friend David. So he lied about being on a mission. What else? He lied about it being an urgent mission. He lied that it was a secret mission. What else do you see?
I'm assuming he lied about his men being kept from women, but I don't know that that's.
Yeah, we don't know that for sure, but there's a probably good likelihood that that's not true either. And what's interesting to me is Ahimelech. What was his posture? What was he experiencing as David came by himself? Verse 1. All right, he's trembling. This is not the way things usually are. He sensed this. There's something amiss here. Something was not right, and so David had to come up with a pretty good lie in order to convince him to do what he did. And so David was successful in convincing him through this lie. So why did David do this? Why didn't he just say, "Saul's chasing me and I don't have anywhere else to turn"? Why did he lie about this?
What's the phrase whenever I give you the reason to say, "I don't know"? I forgot what the word is. I didn't know the truth.
Plausible
plausible
deniability.
deniability.
Okay, so he was in his own mind, he was thinking, I am going to give Ahimelech the ability to say, I don't know what you're talking about.
And do you think Ahimelech didn't know exactly what was going on? So he gave the same plausible deniability. Well, I've got this bread. If you guys had done the right thing, you know.
Yeah, it seems neither one wants to dig a little deeper. They're both kind of, okay, we'll play this kind of game together and go on. But it's not going to turn out well at all. Which has implications maybe for its application for us. So we'll talk about that later. Doeg was an Edomite. Who were the Edomites?
Descendants of Esau.
All right, they were descendants of Esau, and I didn't know a whole lot about him, but I know I learned a lot more when we went on our trip to Israel. They lived in a rocky hill country called Seir, or what's now known as Petra. It's really about as unusual topography as I've seen on the planet, that people lived there. And so the Edomites were descendants of Esau. What was the relationship between Israel and the Edomites? All right, they were related, but what were they politically or militarily?
They're enemies.
They're enemies. They're enemies. Remember when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt and they wanted to get to the promised land? They wouldn't let them through. They said, hey, we'll just stay on the king's highway. If any of our people take water or food or we'll pay for it. They said, do not come through or we'll attack you. So there's that tension historically. Doeg apparently was part of King Saul's inner circle and served as chief shepherd. So David probably knew him well, and that may have been the reason David requested a sword, just in case Doeg decided he would do a little bounty hunting. And he's certainly capable because from what we see later on. So David knew the character of Doeg. Let's read verses 8 through 10.
David asked Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent. The priest replied, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one. David said, there is none like it. Give it to him.
And 10.
That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath.
All right. Saul's insecurities, jealousy, and paranoia made him mentally unstable. He essentially accused everyone of conspiring against him. We didn't read chapter 22. Sorry. David, can you read chapter 22, 8 through 10?
22, 8 through 10.
Yeah.
Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine.
Okay. Saul's insecurity, jealousy, and paranoia made him mentally unstable. He essentially accused everyone of conspiring against him. If you had been in the group of people he was addressing, you're all conspiring against me. How would you have reacted and why?
Probably find a way to get on his good side.
All All right,
Let them know that you're not conspiring against them.
you would have tried to convince him otherwise. I'm not conspiring against you. Okay. Others, what would you have done?
Well, I mean, you got a leader who is very erratic. So they're gonna have one of two positions. They're either gonna hide or they're gonna back him up, no matter how erratic you may seem. And no, we're not talking about modern politics.
Or maybe we are.
It's survival, right? So if you don't back him up, then off with your head. So,
Okay.
so which is not common to modern politics either.
Yeah, so you might have found some way to comply with him, appease him, so that you survive. Anybody been angry? Be falsely accused? Anybody been angry about that? No, some of these guys probably said, "I'm a loyalist." Well, why are you accusing me of doing this? I haven't done any of this stuff you're accusing me of. I imagine that there were some people, at least in their mind, who were dismissive. Saul's not in his right mind. We just kind of have to overlook this and deal with it. Probably worried about how following someone like that, where this is going to lead. So Saul had no basis for his accusations. He had no good reason to be hostile toward David, which his son Jonathan tried to convince him of. And so, have you all ever had circumstances in your life where you were dealing with someone with insecurities that were debilitating to them, and you kind of had to look around and over the insecurities and see through the insecurities in order to deal with the person? That's what everybody in this situation is having to do. That Saul was so consumed by his insecurities that people just have to deal with what's going on. Anybody? No. You don't have to say who. It's just, but sure, if you deal with people whose insecurities, you kind of have to work around it.
That's kind of the definition of marriage in a lot of ways. She has to deal with my insecurities and work around it. I have to deal with hers. Otherwise, we don't necessarily have a marriage.
Yeah, and what's ironic about that is that many of us enter marriage convinced that the other one doesn't have any insecurities. And that's part of what attracted us to it. Yeah. So that's a reality we have to work with. All right, somebody read verses 11 through 19. See what happens here.
Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all the men of his family who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and the sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me, as he does today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." And the king ordered the guards at his side, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me." But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Then the king ordered Doeg, "You turn and strike down the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priest, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep.
Unfortunately, David's lies put the priests from Nob in danger. Saul's madness kept him from demonstrating proper respect for the priesthood. How was Doeg an opportunist, and what did he do that was so despicable? So how was he an opportunist, first of all?
He was trying to get on Saul's good side, saying, hey, son of Jesse went to Abimelech and he gave him bread and sword. You know, trying to stir up trouble, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody else is telling you where David is. I'll tell you where David is. I saw him. Yeah, all these other people may be conspiring against you, but I'm with you, King. So he's ingratiating himself with King Saul.
Feeding his delusion.
He's feeding his delusion. Yeah. I mean, Saul goes to Ahimelech and he says, "You've sided with David." And what does Ahimelech say? I'm clueless about this whole thing. And what did he say about David? What did Ahimelech say about David?
Isn't he your most trusted bodyguard and captain of your army?
If you trust anyone, David should be the person you trust most. Which is remarkable because Saul characterizes David as someone who's out there just lying in wait for Saul. But we know, and Saul knew, that on 2 occasions, David really did have opportunities to slaughter Saul, but what did he do? Showed mercy. He even felt guilt-stricken when he cut the edge of his robe off. That's how loyal David was to King Saul. So all of this delusion, all this that he's contrived in his own mind, is true madness. And Ahimelech's going to pay. Ahimelech and the priests in the town of Nob are going to pay the penalty, the price for Saul's crazed circumstance. So Doeg did something that not even the king's men were willing to do, and that's what?
Follow the orders of his commander.
Why did the men disobey?
Because they didn't want to touch God's anointed.
And they probably knew he was innocent.
I'm trying to think how much, it's not like he had a gun, how much effort would that take to kill 85 men and then go into the town and hundreds and sheep and cattle and is he doing this alone?
Right, yeah. Are people holding them or, you know?
What?
It was a sword-free zone. I don't know, but
That's all.
I think they should have had some swords and fought back.
Well, then he took it he went a step further, more than, then he went after the whole city, right? Children and babies and donkeys. That was more than what Saul had.
Yeah, there's no respect here, and this gets to those of you who are in the early assembly. There was no respect for things that are holy. None. And again, it has that on its surface, if you're just talking about it theoretically, it doesn't sound all that bad, but the dangers of following that path are far-reaching. And we see it here. First of all, David didn't ask Ahimelech to consult God. At least it's not recorded. That's what Doeg said David did, but that's not what he did. He didn't present Ahimelech as an innocent servant of the king. He presented him in a very biased way and presented him as being in allegiance with David. That's the way he was presented to him. Ahimelech helped David, but he didn't present it in the context of Ahimelech being innocent or not knowledgeable of what was going on. So it left all of these this void in Nob, and he didn't do it with any hesitation at all. I'm going to tell you about Doeg's heart. I started off class talking about, tells you something about his character, his personality, what's going on in his heart. For him to do this so ruthlessly and without hesitation, him being the one eyewitness of what had transpired. What does that tell you about him?
You talk about Saul being a little bit off, and something I've noticed personally is that crazy finds crazy. So I think somebody looking for those types of things, they tend to, the men were like, this isn't right, we can't do this. But he, like you said, no hesitation, he just jumped on it because the heart there was already twisted, right? And so I think he, that type of attitude or whatever, not questioning Saul, not thinking anything he's doing was off, it's just crazy finds crazy.
And it's like Saul is his God, not God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and yeah, so let me defend Doeg for a minute here. He was an Edomite. So he's probably following Asherah or Baal. Okay. And so the idea that he would go wipe out these priests is not necessarily, we don't know character. He may have been very faithful to Dagon or, Baal or something like that, in the same way that, there's other stories in the Bible where their priests get completely slaughtered and wiped out in one day. So, the sort of weird part was, why do you have this guy at your court, who obviously is commanding some people to be able to do this, is my guess, that Saul is letting him be there. So he might have been just soldier of fortune, but he also may have been, very devoted to Asherah or whatever, and get the chance to wipe out these people that follow this God. They'll take it every time.
Well, and it also says he was the chief shepherd. Who was the last shepherd that made an impact in Saul's life? Well, that was David. So maybe he's, trying to be what David proved a shepherd could become, and he's trying to become a big dog within the, household of Saul at that point. But, the problem that I have with this story in particular is, who is at fault? Is he at fault because of what Saul ordered him to do? This is a kind of a conversation I'd had with my brother-in-law years ago, who is in the military. When you are given orders, what do you do when you have a problem with them? Well, you follow the orders. What if they're wrong? Does it matter at that point? Is there war crimes? How do you live with that?
And that's what the people of Germany argued during Hitler's day, is we were just following orders. You're leading us into question number 6, David. When David received the report of the slaughter of the priests, he blamed himself. Was he responsible or not? Explain.
Well, all lies and deceit usually end up with repercussions.
So, is he responsible?
I think in some way he was
Yes.
responsible.
In some way, he was responsible.
It'd be a false scenario to say, what would David, if David had said, I'm on the run from Saul, or starving, he's trying to kill me, what would the priest have done? We have no idea, but instead he just chose to lie. So
On top of that, he took one of the greatest treasures, the symbolic treasures, being the sword of Goliath. What does that say on a political nature? Yeah, I think he was at fault.
He had a guilty conscience because he brought Ahimelech into the party, and that was his doing. I think that's where he why he feels like it's his fault. Because if he hadn't done that, then there would have been no reason to call him like into Saul's court and say, "What did you do?" But he put him in that position. So I think he feels responsible because he put him in that position. But at the end of the day, he's not the one that slaughtered him. But I think he feels responsible for bringing him and putting him in that.
David was responsible for lying. Okay, he was responsible for lying. What it highlights is sins, and in this case, lies, sin often has unforeseen consequences to it. I don't think David had any idea, any possible connection that this, I mean, if he had thought this could even be a possibility, he would have handled this differently. But it points out that sin takes sometimes a life of its own in ways that we have no idea how it's going to play out. And it plays out a lot worse than we ever expected that it would. And that's what happens. And so while Saul and Doeg were responsible for the slaughter, and they couldn't blame David as the excuse for the slaughter, David was responsible for the lie that started this in the direction it went. Which is the lead into the last question that I want us to spend some time with. David was a fugitive, so he lied. Saul was insecure, so he went crazy. Doeg was an opportunist, so he took personal advantage of the failings of David and Saul. And the innocent priesthood paid the price. What really stands out to you from this account, and how will it affect your own behavior?
See, when I look at this, it looks like David is the opportunist to me, because he saw the opportunity to feed his men, to take advantage of a relationship that he had, and yeah, this, if you look at the life of David, they study in unintended consequences, and for me personally, I probably get too far down the unintended consequences. Should I say this? Should I say that? What does this mean? I just had an argument with Stephanie and she didn't open her mouth. It's.
So you're someone who thinks a lot about where this could lead, and so that you can avoid those unintended consequences. And so that's perhaps a lesson to be learned from all this, is you can't allow your desperation or your feelings in the moment to determine what you do. You need to think about, where might this go? And a lot of people don't. Okay, a lot of people think about, what do I want in this moment, or what seems to be the easiest solution in this moment, and never think about where this could lead later on.
Or they think this will only affect me,
Or this will only affect me.
won't have any consequences to anyone else.
Other lessons you see in this?
To me, I think about, and I guess I think about this a lot with David, also with Paul. All the stuff that he did, and yet, he had a really good relationship with God. He wrote scripture after all this. So that idea of, oh, I messed up, I lied, and 100 people are slaughtered because of it. That wasn't the end of his life. He still woke up the next day and turned out did things that were so amazing that made this seem inconsequential. I mean, the same way with, Saul Paul. And so, there is hope in that yes, we see, the disaster that happened and all of the, but that's not the end of the story. For Doeg, it is, but so there's still that forgiveness, there's still hope, there's still, and I say still, but when you look at the people, that actually wrote scripture, they were all messed up, you know, in the sense of their lives. And if they weren't messed up, I mean, like David, his kids were messed up. And, you know, I mean, it's, we can still have that connection with God. We can still accomplish things for God, even in the midst of all this mess that is sometimes our fault.
I think what's particularly powerful about David is you can go through Psalms and see him coming to grips with his things that he screwed up and his grief and his praise, and you know, putting he's not a black and white guy, you know. He's a guy who developed a whole lot of wisdom by making a whole lot of mistakes.
And so it's possible, as Russell was pointing out, it's possible to one day awaken to your life going the wrong direction or being in a mess and say, I can't do anything about what has happened, but I can begin today in a new direction. And that's the hope in Christ that we have. Is it doesn't matter how far off you have veered from God. If you have an awakening and repent, your life can have a different outcome. And that's wonderful good news. What other lessons?
Who do you give your allegiance to? Is lessons for me. Do you give it to the president? Do you give it to social media? Do you give it to celebrities? Or do you give it to God? Like you were talking about this morning, you know, what do you find holy? You know, obviously Doeg didn't find the priests holy. You know, he looked on them with, I don't know if he looked on them with contempt, but he didn't look on them with love and respect.
Does it say how Doeg came to be there? Was he tracking, following David? Did he just happen to be there? I was just curious about that as I was sitting here daydreaming.
No, I don't think it tells us how he ended up there at the same time.
It says he was detained.
Yeah.
What is that? I was wondering what that, he was detained by God. What does that mean? Like God kept him there, so God put him there and made sure he was there when David was there, or
Some of the commentators about this talk about that perhaps he had been making a sacrifice of some sort, and it couldn't be completed except for him staying that extra amount of time. He was detained in order to complete the sacrifice or offering, whatever it is.
interesting.
Yeah.
So he's an Edomite making a sacrifice to God.
Perhaps. I mean, again, that's what some have speculated, trying to explain, you know, what your question was.
Sure.
Without, I don't know that we have a definitive scriptural answer to it.
You know, this event is referred to by Jesus when referring to the Sabbath was, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And he referred to this event and this exchange between Ahimelech and David, and it appears not in an unfavorable light. And so this exchange was probably okay in the eyes of God, at least it appears that way, even despite David not quite representing why he was there. It's something to think about.
Yeah, what Jesus seems to be approving in that about the exchange was that it was sacred bread, but when somebody is in a desperate situation, it's okay for them to have sacred bread. Don't treat this legalistically, was his point. So don't treat the Sabbath. That's what it was all about. So don't treat the Sabbath legalistically. It was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. This bread was made as a sustaining substance. Okay, it's holy bread, but you've got somebody who's desperate and in need. It's okay for them to have that. And so there's a lesson built into that as well.
You know, that I struggle, I think, with that whole concept, you know, because I think, at least to me, it's so easy to look back in scripture when you know the ending and you point out, God, what did he get that guy? Why was he doing that? But I don't know. If I was there, would I don't do the same thing? I mean, you're just trying to get food and he's desperate. And, probably do the same. I mean, it's easy to sit back now and go, well, you should never do that because you know how it turns out in the moment. And I think we find ourselves that way a lot. I mean, most people in this room have probably told a lot thinking, somebody said earlier, it's either not going to hurt anybody or, you know, I'm protecting somebody. There's a lot of rational reasons to go there where you can think this is probably the best thing. In some cases, maybe it is. And, you know, I get conflicted there. I mean, is it really? Nope, I never tell a lie. You know, before you answer that, when your wife asks you, does this outfit make me look big? You do. You know, do you ever, I mean, I just struggle with that. Yeah, I really struggle with that.
Yeah, and people who are desperate do desperate things. People who are desperate and don't have resources, the only resource they have is to use other people. I mean, how many of us have felt used before and been lied to be used and went away feeling used as a result and thought, I can't believe here I helped you and you lied to me and you used me. When you're desperate, that's all you got. And so it's kind of changed in some ways the way I view people through the years I've helped in benevolence. Okay, they may have lied to me. But if they thought that's the only way I'm going to be able to get something and survive, maybe I shouldn't be so hard on them. Thoughts about that? Well, this is an ethics question this morning.
You're right. It's developed survival skill, you know, because we think in terms of like, how could they do that? But we're also thinking in terms of, you know, I'm not thinking about how am I going to feed my kids tonight. I'm thinking about, you know, hey, I've got to get groceries for a week, or, you know, I've got to, you know, prepare for whatever long term. But they're, and for whatever reason, they put themselves in a position, right? Sometimes it's on purpose or because of decisions they made, and sometimes it's because of things that have happened to them that they can't control. They're just there and they've got to somehow get out. And there's that hump that people have trouble getting through. But, you know, it's a survival skill. I'm trying to figure out how am I going to feed my kids tonight. So if I got to tell a lie to get some food on the table, that's what they do.
You are right, Matt. Who said these words?
Jesus twice.
This was something he was trying to teach the Pharisees who were bound by legalism. Oftentimes, again, if we're on the end of the one being used or feeling like we're being used, we think, wait a minute, do things right. Do things right. And Jesus said, okay, yeah, do things right, be righteous. But here's what I desire even above that you be merciful.
Makes me think of one of my favorite movies, Les Mis. The guy had stolen bread because he was hungry, went to prison for it, and then when he was released, he had nothing, and he stole those candlesticks from the priest's house.
Silverware. And yes.
He was caught, but the priest covered for him.
And then gave them the candlesticks.
Yeah.
So you
Said,
forgot those.
I gave them
Yeah.
to you, but he spent his whole life, he wasn't a bad man. He spent his whole life trying to live in an honorable way. He was in a desperate situation.
Yeah, so I hope this colors how we see people that we may have opportunity to help, who may not be always 100% honest with us in what they're dealing with. Wow, I feel like we're just now getting into the good part of our discussion, so, but we're gonna have to call it close, call it an end, because I've got this thing I gotta do. So.